All right. So good morning, everyone. This is the January 26th Policy Committee meeting. It's nice to see everyone. These are the second half of the 100 level policies. And just as a refresher, these policies have been reviewed by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association as part of our review in 2021-2022 of all policies by PSBA. And then a number of the policies, there were also recommendations for our school district solicitor, Fox Rothschild, to also provide guidance. And so we'll be highlighting some of the policies where Fox actually had some fairly substantive recommendations. So we're going to begin with policy 103, discrimination or harassment affecting students. For this policy, there are a number of recommendations which we are in agreement with. And I'll go to the policy in just a moment. Wanted to just highlight that most of these updates have to do with aligning with Title IX language that came in several years ago. And so you see some pretty significant changes as a result of that federal law. And then in addition to that, there are two attachments that Fox has reviewed for us because they are local documents. Rather than state level policies. The first attachment, Fox is recommending that we remove pages 5 to 11, and that is the complaint form, because that describes what the district will do following the receipt of a complaint. And so their suggestion is that in most school districts, only pages 1 to 4 are available publicly on the website, and then 5 to 11 are retained by the district but not publicized. And certainly we can go either way, but that's the recommendation of Fox. In addition, there are a number of changes to attachment 2. So many, and we just received them yesterday, that I attach that in your email, and I can bring up that attachment to discuss if you like. But if you agreed with those recommended changes from Fox, we would then delete the prior attachment and just attach the mocked up document that Fox prepared for us. And then finally for this policy, there is some conversation that we can table for now, but pick back up in the 200s when we get to those in the next few months. Policy 248 is repetitive in the view of Fox. And they recommend, as does PSBA, that we delete or repeal policy 248 because they believe that it's and place that content in an employee handbook. And I know, Emily, you have some feedback on that if the board members have questions, because I know you've been involved in particular 248 and 348, which is related to policy 104. So I can go to the document itself in board docs to policy 103, and then just see what questions any of the members of the board have about the recommended changes. So you should be able to unmute yourself if you have any questions or concerns, or you're comfortable with the recommended changes as presented.
Dr. Yannicone, if I could, I'm certainly comfortable with the changes. I did just want to take up your offer to hear from Ms. Carr about the policy 248.
Sure, absolutely. Emily, do you want to jump in?
So it really truly is just repetitive. 248 and 348 were policies for unlawful harassment, which is essentially completely taken over. Now we have a policy 103 and 104 for discrimination and harassment. One is affecting students, one is affecting staff. So unlawful harassment is completely covered in 103 and 104. There were some changes, I think they were made back in 2019 to 348 and 248, and that came out of discussions with staff members that Dr. Hacker and I had, and concerns that they had about harassment or things that may not necessarily rise to the level of discrimination, but certainly made people uncomfortable at work, and then how we responded to that. They wanted something put into policy that would give us maybe some more teeth to hold people accountable, that
And,
maybe didn't rise to the level of discrimination or harassment.
and Ms. Carr, you're comfortable with the change as head of HR?
Yeah, I am comfortable with the change.
Okay.
And quite frankly, we can still hold people accountable, even if it's not in policy for inappropriate conduct. That's always something that's allowed.
Okay, thanks.
The other thing, two other things I'll mention about this policy, and it'll come up again in 104, is first of all, we have to name the Title IX coordinator. And I've consulted with Fox on this because some school districts simply give the title, the compliance officer / Title IX coordinator can be contacted, and they give general information for the district, but they don't name the actual Title IX coordinator and provide their email address. It's the recommendation of Fox that we continue to do this. The challenge to that is that if we were to change the assignment of the Title IX coordinator to another office, we would need to amend the policy. So it should be a simple enough amendment, but I wanted to bring that to your attention because when we complete the hiring of the Director of Support Services, because we are including diversity, equity, and inclusion in that person's area of responsibility, we are going to be having discussions about whether or not the Title IX responsibilities will shift from Emily to the new Director of Support Services. And so if that were the case, later this summer, we would then amend the policy to identify that. You can, according to Fox, make that amendment as a simple change without a full, you can do that in one reading. You don't need two readings when you're just changing the assignment of the Title IX coordinator. Okay. And then the other thing I just wanted to point out to you, and you'll see this several places, we have made an effort in our review of these policies, wherever we saw something where gender is identified, we have tried to remove binary gender. And so you see the phrase gender identity here. In most cases, PSBA or Fox identified that for us. There'll be a few policies moving forward that I'll point out to you where they did not make a recommended change, but based on our equitable practices, we have recommended a change. Okay.
Can I make one comment about it? I don't want to get into the nuances of it, but I noticed that you have sex separate from gender, and that opens a whole conversation. But if you have gender identity, do you still need to have sex in there? Because my understanding is people traditionally use sex to mean a binary gender designation of male or female. And if you're moving away from that and an era of more expansiveness, understanding of gender are both still needed.
It's a good question. I can certainly follow up before our February 15th meeting and confirm that with our solicitor. I want to make sure that we're not unintentionally locking anyone out of the policy.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure exactly the legalities versus sort of the cultural moment that
I will tell you from a legal standpoint, sex is listed under the law. So it should be included in policy to make sure we're covering all bases. That it's not going to limit us. It's just going to allow us to cover things under sex and gender identity.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so would you like to review the attachment that I emailed to you separately? So this attachment here at the bottom of your board docs has some significant changes. Once again. And again, the language again has been shifted to align with Title IX. So the form essentially mirrors what you saw in the main policy. And then on the first attachment, the report form, just to clarify, so if you go to page 4 of that report, this is the end of the person who's actually presenting the complaint or the report to the district, the allegation of harassment. What follows are for official use only. These are the rest of the forms that we would use internally. So again, Fox is recommending that we remove these forms from our website. And again, this is just every step that's being taken. Now, again, it is a board decision. They're not advising that we're in any difficulty if we leave them on there. They're just pointing out that it is unusual to include pages 5 through 11 on a public site.
Are there any potential disadvantages or risks that they identified as part of that?
Only that you're providing a lot of information from a legal perspective about our processes and practices, which may not be advisable. Emily, do you want to?
Yeah, the more you put out what our district rules and responsibilities are going to be, the more then you give people to sue you based upon. So if you say these are the absolute steps we're going to follow every single time, and then you don't follow it one time, they can then sue you for not following your practices or poke holes in your investigation. So it's a best practice. It's not something that legally we have to, all of those pieces are not legally what we have to do, but it's certainly a best practice and a way to keep us on track. But it's definitely advisable not to put something up there that legally we're not required to do.
I definitely agree with that, removing it, only because parents will see that and definitely will call to every single point after. And I think that the district operates in terms of transparency and in terms of a good ethical stance. So I don't think that's needed to be there.
Essentially, what I'm hearing is it raises the burden for the district. And in this instance, our goal is to meet the burden, but not necessarily go beyond what's needed. Because from a legal standpoint, it puts the district in a more challenging position. Okay. So are you comfortable with policy 103 and the 2 attachments as recommended?
Yes.
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 Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, and then 103.1 and 103.2. 103.1, the recommendation is that we just adopt it as it is recommended in the language that's been provided. There really weren't substantive changes. The reason why we didn't put 103.1 on with the first round at our January 18th meeting and at our last policy meeting is that we wanted to pull all of non-discrimination together. And as a team, we wanted to review these policies because we feel like they have a more significant impact on day-to-day life at school than perhaps some of the other policies we reviewed earlier. But there really aren't substantive changes to this policy. Do you want me to open the policy or are you comfortable as is? Okay. They've also recommended we adopt 103.2, again, with minimal changes. I just want to point out that Fox had indicated that 103.2 and 104.2 are the choice of a district as a separate policy. In some districts, they combine 103 and 104. So they combine staff and students, and they combine based on sex versus all other areas. We have kept them separated out for clarity's sake. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, no, it does. Is there, I didn't see that there was any reason necessarily to change it other than that's what some other folks do.
Right, agreed. In my conversations with our representative at Fox, this is perfectly fine. All that they did, and you can see that in the cross-reference notes, is take 103.2 and 104.2 and convert them to board docs. Other than that, the policies are all remaining as is. Okay. And then 104 are the identical recommendations and identical adjustments to 103. But we've made the decision that we would like to keep them separate, students and staff as separate policies, even though the procedures are essentially the same. And then similar to 248, potentially being repealed because it's redundant to 103, it would be policy 348, redundant to policy 104. Would you like me to open that policy, or are you comfortable with the changes as recommended?
I'm comfortable. Thank you.
I am too.
Okay. And then similarly, 104.2 mirrors 103.2. So we're okay with the non-discrimination and harassment policies. Okay, very good. All right, so we're going to shift to lesson plans. And I'm going to ask Damien to talk a little bit about that. And Damien, I'll bring up the policy.
Thanks, Dr. Yannicka. Good morning, everyone. We reviewed the lesson plan policy that had been in place and compared it to what was being proposed by PSBA. And quite frankly, there were things in the policy that we were not doing before. As a school district, our trust in our highly qualified educators and their professionalism, we don't collect or review lesson plans on a regular basis. Lesson plans are reviewed with a teacher at the time of their observation, as needed, or when a substitute is coming into the classroom. So we wanted to revise this to be a little more contemporary, also in honoring the ways in which teachers do and are expected to be planful in their instruction. And so we revised some of the language to, along with PSBA and some other local school districts, to come in line with sort of where we are in 2022 and going forward. A recognition that some teachers write them in a plan book and some teachers keep them in a Google Doc or in other online platforms. But that the expectation is that those are accessible to anyone who needs to see them in the event that a teacher is out, but also that in the event that they are asked by their supervisor or building principal, they're able to produce them. And so we made some changes to more come in line with what our current practices are and what we're recommending going forward. Are there questions I can answer or that raises for you?
I think one of the things that is interesting about the last time this policy was reviewed as compared to today is that the online platforms weren't prevalent as they are now. And so families have a significantly higher degree of access to the content and the design of lessons because the textbooks are online, the resources are online. And so really, I think Dr. Johnston and Dr. Van Voren have reviewed this to bring it into the, as she said, into the 21st century. At this point, we're 20% of the way into the 21st century, hard to believe, but are there any questions or concerns about this policy? Sarah?
I have a ignorant question as someone who's not an educator at all. So thank you for your grace and patience with me of asking things that should be obvious. But in terms of how this intersects with the equity audit, if there's no like checking in on the lesson plans other than for when there's substitution or evaluate, like how will you assess that the lesson plans are sort of absorbing and reflecting the equity action plan?
It's a good question, Dr. Johnson. You may have a more specific answer. What I can say is that the lessons are actually reviewed. Each grade level team, for example, at the elementary school meets on a weekly basis, and they review the upcoming lessons. And so, and then the principals oftentimes will sit in on those grade level meetings. And that is how they are made aware on a regular basis. And then in addition to that, we have an administrative expectation that our school administrators are frequently in and out of classrooms to observe and to get feedback. I don't know, Damien, if you want to highlight anything else.
I think that was my greater question, is the sole recording of what's happening in a lesson, given that they often reference the teacher resources and materials, doesn't actually indicate to me the demonstration of equitable practices in interactions between teacher and student and their planful approach. I think the greater challenge is to our academic affairs committee and to our curriculum planning process to make sure that our overall curriculum is embedded in the depth of fabric that ensures that we're meeting the needs of all of our learners and that we've got that really articulated. So we have a way to hold teachers accountable, and then that presence of our administrators and sort of central office personnel in and out of buildings and listening to parent report and students in our advisory committee, that triangulation of information, I think, Sarah, really does speak to exactly what you're saying, the accountability at the front line. I think under that equity action plan, I think we're going to determine what does that accountability look like? Is there a measure? Is there something we're going to talk about? But that's where we talked about those feedback and surveys from students, staff, families about their experience and whether or not we're actually doing what we said.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And yeah, I think I was thinking about it more from the curriculum perspective as you were talking, I realized, but yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
No, that's great. Thanks. Okay. All right. So going back here to our informal agenda, are we comfortable adopting 111 as recommended?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'll go to 115. So 115 is another policy that had only a handful of changes from PSBA, but we did want to confirm that our process of developing career and technical education and our work with Eastern is in line with the new policy. And it is. So this is fairly straightforward. So I just wanted to make sure that you were able to review those changes in bold. And essentially what you're seeing here about the adults is just confirming that it's not enough for somebody in the career and technical schools to have a specialty in a particular area. For example, auto mechanics. They do have to have all of the clearances on file, just as a comprehensive public high school does, in order to make sure our students who we're sending to Eastern are safe. Make sense?
It does.
Okay. And so you can see there in the cross-reference why they added this language, but essentially I've just summarized that for you. Any questions or concerns about 115?
No.
All right, so the next policy, policy 116, we are actually recommending that we delete the policy. We are concerned about issues of equity for our students, and we're concerned about liability for any recommended tutors who we don't hire, families hire. So if you take a look at this policy and the language included, essentially, this allows any community member the ability to obtain a tutor. And we are supposed to maintain a list of tutors that we recommend to families. This does not speak to who pays for the tutoring. And traditionally that would be the family themselves. So that's where we have a concern around equity. And then in addition, we have concerns about our liability as a district if we put a professional on a list of recommended tutors and then something occurs in the home, during a tutoring session, or at a library, et cetera. In speaking with Fox, they agree that this is not a policy that is necessary for a district. And Damien, I don't know if you want to highlight sort of the day-to-day practices of how families go about getting tutors.
Before I answer your question, may I say one other thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think the other part of this policy that is concernable is it basically suggests that we as a district have limited responsibility to ensure that students are making progress and meeting their academic requirements. Right? This basically says if they're not doing well, they should go get tutoring. I think it, from a child find perspective, really puts us from my old hat, my prior role here, right, suggests that we don't have to do a good job and parents can just go get a tutor if they don't think it's working for their child. That just sits with me in a way that makes me uncomfortable, because I think the onus is on us to ensure our students are doing well, and when they're not, to provide intervention. And so it's not the onus on the family they can choose to go do that if they so choose, but we want to sort of take ourselves out of that. What has happened in the past is Even when I first got here, I heard rumors of this like magical list, that we kept this like list in the school counselor's office of approved tutors. But approved based on what? We didn't know anything. We didn't have clearances on them. I just think it puts, my recommendation is that, and to Dr. Yannicone, was that we really step away from this role. We've increasingly not provided that list to anyone because there were questions on how you got on the list and whether or not that was transparent and ethical. I'm not saying anything unethical happened. I'm just saying, like, so if you call, you get on the list, like that's all it takes. There's no recommendation. There's no formalized process. It just felt clunky. We have moved increasingly away from that. When families want to find tutors, we have responded to them on how families have found tutors. We've connected them with other families and recommended they go back to the community. And I know that as people who live here in the neighborhoods, we know those Facebook groups are very popular to ask for who do you use for. But that puts all the onus on the family and takes the school completely out of the relationship. That does not suggest we are not collaborative with tutors once families have made that choice. When we're aware a tutor exists, we're happy to provide support or information so that they can be successful in working with the student. Are there questions I can answer?
No, but Damien, I would say I'm in complete agreement with everything you just said. And I think you should take that responsibility off of the school district. And I agree, it sends a message like we're not doing what we should be doing. And that's why you need to get this. So I am in agreement of getting rid of it.
Thanks, Amy.
And I'm also in agreement that in the district I was in, they did have an approved list of tutors in that particular district. And actually the tutors sitting on the list were often educators in the district. And there was always a question about how you got on the tutor list. And so I think it's good to remove it. But I also think that it's important that the district does provide the tutors once they're identified, if a parent goes to a tutor, so forth. And it's good in sharing information that would help them, that to be a beneficial partnership for the parent and that tutor. So I think it should be removed.
Carla, to build on what you said, I think that expectation of collaboration and interagency support exists beyond tutors, right? Like, so we work to reach out to therapists or counselors that are working with our students, or occupational or physical therapists. Like whenever there is a JABA-like private service that parents have arranged for their child, we have worked as a school district to be responsive and collaborative, assuming that we have a release of information from the family signed and on file. So I appreciate that point. I would just extend that beyond just the tutoring situation, where we need to play nicely in the sandbox with those who are serving children and families.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. So for that policy, we'll recommend that it is repealed or deleted at our next meeting. Okay. The next three policies are all related to interscholastic athletics. And so I met with our athletic directors, Joe Ferraro and Jason Payne. Also met on policy 123.2 with our secondary nurses to make sure that we were in compliance. And so on 123, interscholastic athletics, there really weren't substantive changes from PSBA or from Fox. The one thing that we did change was towards the bottom. And when I made this change, I did it without strike and add, so I apologize. But this word gender here in the document actually said male/female. If you go to the current policy, that's actually what it says. So we took away that binary identification and feel that we can do that without changing the requirement. There is a requirement that continues that each year we have to identify our male and female population because of Title IX. And so Title IX hasn't changed that designation at this point, but we felt at least in the language, we could make the change to gender. And the same thing here in the sentence, this word gender is actually male, female in the current policy. So we're just trying to get a little ahead of what we anticipate will be changes that'll be recommended down the road because of what's occurring right now with regard to gender identification. So those are the only changes that have been made. Now I will say here, we didn't make a change because there isn't currently any language that I think would support us changing the word both to all. And so in talking, we left that as it is while removing the male-female identification. So that was the step we took in this particular policy. Are there any questions about that? Okay. And then the related policies, 123.1 is our policy on concussion management. So what I asked our athletic directors and our nurses to do is confirm that everything in this policy is being strictly adhered to with regard to concussion management. And it was a good opportunity for the coaches to reflect. They feel very good about what we're doing, but it was important for us, I think, to review once again how we're managing concussion in the district. In this policy, our nurses also clarified with our athletic directors what the violations are. So our conversation really centered on what will happen to a coach if they do not follow the concussion protocol. And that was an important conversation for us to have because it led to discussion of coaches' education and training and making sure they're aware of expectations because we hire new coaches very frequently. So making sure that our coaches have that education is a priority for our athletic directors and for us. So any questions? There really weren't changes to this policy from PSBA or Fox, but I wanted you to know we reviewed the policy carefully because we do know it has a day-to-day impact at school. And then,
Questions, thanks.
okay. And then sudden cardiac arrest, there were a few changes, but really this is essentially, again, overwhelmingly the existing policy. But I did want you to know, again, that our nurses reviewed this carefully, our athletic directors reviewed it, and I have mentioned at other meetings, we have increased our purchase of our defibrillator devices across the campuses, across all 4 schools, and our training to make sure that there are multiple people in each building, both during and after school activities, who know how to use AEDs. And we also have, as part of our safety plan, ongoing evaluation to make sure the batteries are up to date, et cetera. And because we have very young children in the schools, for KidView and for other community programs, we have AEDs at our elementary schools that are specifically designed for very young children. So these 3 policies, if I go back to my overall agenda, just want to make sure you know where we made some minor changes to the identification of gender, and then just confirmed that we are following all of the current language on concussion management and sudden cardiac arrest. Are there any questions? Okay.
Nope.
All right. So we're going to shift to policy 127. And again, I'm going to refer to Damien. She's been working on this policy.
I couldn't get my button to unmute. Sorry about that, everyone. We are recommending that we continue to adopt the recommendations for this process or policy as recommended by PSBA and Fox. It talks about sort of the school assessments that we'll be providing, which, as you know, we're using the STAR 360 assessment at this time. Dr. Yannicka and I were trying to remember yesterday. I believe this is the 3rd year of implementation. I think I told you it was 2nd yesterday, but I actually think it's 3rd. You were right. So this is our 3rd year, so we will continue to review that along with those data. Again, that happens nicely on that 3-year cycle around the time of our comprehensive plan. So that's a really natural time for us to continue to review those kinds of decisions as a school district. You know that we'll be sharing that upcoming information at an academic affairs meeting in the very beginning of February. So this also allows and clarifies the responsibility and process when a family is requesting to opt out. We have had families opt out not only of the required state assessments, PSSAs, and Keystones at the from grades 3 through 12. But also this year, we've had our first request from a family to opt out of STAR 360 testing. And so we went through used the exact same process that we use for other opt-outs, asking them to review it, talked with them, met with them, tried to hear out their concerns. So at this time, this is the recommendation, is that we move forward with their proposed changes. Any questions for me about that? Okay.
No,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. So we're going to shift to policy 131. So I just want to share a little bit about this. So both PSBA and Fox are recommending that we delete policy 131. They believe that it is, and if you look in the cross-reference, they believe that freedom of speech for students is addressed in policy 220, which we're going to get to in another month, and for employees in draft policy 320. And then that religion in regards to instruction is addressed in 105.2, and religion is a protected class in policies 103 and 104. So essentially what PSBA and Fox are saying is that you don't need 131. You have multiple other policies that address religion in the schools. My only reticence in suggesting that we include this in our February 15th meeting is that the current political climate may make this challenging for the board. If you would like to follow that recommendation and delete the policy, we can certainly include in our summary, in your board report, whoever's going to make that board report, why policy 131 is being removed. But we could wait until we move through policies 220 and 320 to make sure that you're fully comfortable and adopting 103 and 104 before we would delete 131, or we can leave it. It's not problematic for the district. They just believe it is redundant and unnecessary. But I do understand that for the board, it may be unnecessarily attention drawing. So it's really up to the board. We're thinking that maybe to table the discussion and revisit it when we're in the 200s. And when we look a little bit more closely at draft policy 220, which speaks to religion and curriculum, that might be something that would be more amenable to the board. But we'll take your lead on that.
I think we should table it, go with your, I think in lieu of what we see happening at the board meetings and the climate that we are in, that we should table it right now.
Okay, thank you. Others?
Yeah, I don't feel strongly enough that I'm going to hold up the process, but I just want to say personally, I don't want to give power to a few disruptors to dictate how we operate as a board and what our procedures and policies are. That being said, I don't want to put my fellow board members in a position where they feel uncomfortable, so I'm not going to block it, but I just wanted to articulate that they are winning if we, I mean, not that we're seeing this as a winning or losing scenario, but they are driving what our priorities are if we respond to them in that way.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely don't see it as necessarily winning, and I agree with you in that way, Sarah, but I do think that since we're a board that is supposed to be responsive to our community and I feel like we don't need to we don't need to pump the fire in this particular issue. I think we have other issues that we're working with, that we're dealing with, that we need to make sure we are able to articulate, that we have to listen to our community and then also respond to them. I think the community does need to feel that they're being heard, et cetera, et cetera. And I think a discussion of this with religion is just going to be extra fire that is not necessarily right now at this time when we're trying to put forward other things that are really very, very critical, especially because we already know it's covered in all the other policies. I don't think we need to just say, well, we're getting rid of that particular policy. That's I don't know if they're going to understand that when you say, well, taking out the religion policy, that's going to be an issue. That's how I feel.
No, I absolutely agree, and I appreciate you. Absolutely, I hear the strategy in it of like, let's pick what we want to put forward and agree. I think I just personally wanted to articulate that I'm going along with it, but with that sort of feeling that I just wanted to make sure that we keep in mind. But I absolutely agree with this. It's not, there's no disadvantage to keeping it right now, and everything is covered, like you said, Carla.
Dr. Yannicka,
Yes.
do you anticipate, or members of the board, do you anticipate that we could be asked about it in the review of these 100s, that if someone wanted to be going through to see where we are, why we're not talking about this one way or the other? Like, do we need to, is there anything we need to do to couch that so that there's not a perception that we're trying to bury it either? Like,
Right.
sorry, I agree with you. I just think also to be transparent and authentic, like we are considering religion in the schools in the context of these other policies, and we're not ready to address it. I'm wondering if that's necessary or not.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, we are not suggesting that ultimately we do not delete it, because the whole purpose of getting a PSBA evaluation and Fox review is to make sure that our policies are current and best support the district's goals. The reason why we're suggesting we table it until the next meeting in our agenda is that there is a draft policy 220 that we will be reviewing at the next meeting, and a draft policy 320 for employees. So we are not seeking to eliminate the concept of religious freedom in the schools for students or staff. We just want to wait to delete it until we have reviewed 220 and 320 to make sure that we're all comfortable with the protections that students and staff have in this area, so that if the board is questioned publicly or privately, you have the opportunity to answer clearly. So after we do the readings of 103 and 104, which will have a first reading on February 15th, and then a second reading on March 1st. And then we have our second reading of 105.2, which will be on February 15th. 3 of the 5 associated policies will have been discussed and reviewed publicly. But 220 and 320 we haven't touched upon yet. And so one of the things I might suggest before our next meeting is to look at the drafts that PSBA has provided in board docs for 220. They're not done 320 yet, but it's going to mirror it, just like 3 and 4, 103 and 104 mirror each other. 220 and 320 mirror each other. And so I think that if you like, we can sort of jump ahead at our next policy meeting, and we'll put 220 and 320 on the agenda so we can look at religious freedom, and knowing that we will have already approved 103, 104, and 105.2, then you could feel comfortable deleting 131. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay. All right, very good. So we'll do that, and we'll bring those together next time we meet. All right, so 137 is our next one, and that's our home education programs. And again, Dr. Johnston's been working on this.
Me and the unmute button are not going along today. And so again, we've continued to reflect and revise. There was a mismatch. This is one of the good examples of why we needed this PSBA update. The Commonwealth has written more substantive guidelines for home education programs, what we would think of as homeschooling, in the last few years, and our policy did not reflect all that information. So this just draws us into a contemporary understanding of our oversight of home education programs. And what's positive about that is it really limits our responsibility for the content of that. It really puts it on that outside evaluator. But in addition, it begins to recognize that it's the family's responsible to meet the special education needs of their students, which that sometimes is a point of tension and disagreement with us. We have changed our district procedures around homeschooling in that, and home education programs, in that we do require those families to register, so that we have basic demographic information about the child and family who are participating. At times that has been problematic in prior years. We didn't even know who in our township was, like, where they lived or the age of the child, because it's not actually wasn't required under the old process and procedures. So this just tightens it up and comes in line with the state expectations.
And then just in addition to that, there was a There is an AR that was last reviewed in 2003. And so, Dr. Johnson, I'm not sure. The AR is out on the website. It is not part of board docs. But we are looking at the extent to which that AR is in compliance, which you'll notice on the cross-reference. They are just making sure that our AR is compliant with the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that's not necessary. It's not a policy you have to approve, but I just wanted to make you aware of it because it is a note from PSBA in the cross-reference. Are there any questions about the home education program? Okay, and then the related policy, the extracurricular activities, there are no changes to this policy. We certainly allow our students in home education to participate in extracurricular activities as the law allows. Okay, and then 138, the language instruction educational program for English learners. We are again recommending that we adopt the recommended changes and that we also delete the AR. So we have a new program booklet. That was actually one of the last things I was able to accomplish in my former role prior to the pandemic, that we really did a thorough assessment and rewriting of the ELL program booklet. And so what we'd like to do is refer families to the website where that program booklet is linked. All of the policies and procedures of our English language program are clearly articulated in that program booklet. And so if I go to the policy itself, so we are recommending the changes. These are all updated guidance from both PSBA and Fox related to federal law around English language instruction. So all of this language is familiar to us. This has been in place for several years. Our policy was just out of date, which is why we're doing the review. And then if I were to go out to the website, it's not an attachment at the bottom, but if I were to go out to the website, you would see a second document that is our AR. We would delete that document. Are there any questions or concerns about this policy?
Nope.
Okay. All right, and then 140.1, we're almost done. 140.1, we agree with. There were not substantive changes. The reason why we held this one off from the previous meeting to this meeting is we wanted to take a close look to make sure we were in compliance, and we are as a district. So we feel very comfortable with this. It's essentially just a confirmation that we've had PSBA review the policy. As a district, we've reviewed internally that we are meeting these expectations. Okay, any questions or concerns there? Okay, so then there are two policies at the very bottom of the board doc section that are new that PSBA included. The first 146.1, we are recommending we table until next year because we believe we'll be incorporating this work into our equity action plan. We do provide trauma-informed education and training to our staff. Dr. Johnston can speak on this more specifically, but we don't believe that right now we want to adopt this policy as a new policy. We'd like some time to review it as a full administrative team and bring it back next year. And Dr. Johnson, you want to speak to that just a little bit more?
Of course, a few years ago, the Commonwealth adopted some best practices in trauma-informed education as an expectation, with some leverage to provide direct training to our faculty, which we have complied with and done. It required us also to create a threat assessment team, which, as you know, we also completed with our clinical personnel and building administrators. The idea that we need to inform our faculty and staff around the ideas and impacts, both visible and invisible, of trauma, of which children may or may not even be aware, is a critical component of our equity work, along with our MTSS, our intervention approaches. But we want to align this so that it doesn't feel like it's out of nowhere and one more thing, instead of continuing to bring it into the umbrella of ways in which we see students' experience, and make sure that we've thought about it from multiple lenses. So we have done some preliminary training for professional and paraprofessional staff around trauma-informed practices and impact to the brain. We will continue to do more, as you can imagine. That has slowed down significantly our rollout of that plan as a result of COVID, because it was happening simultaneously. And so I anticipate that that will take on more life as this equity action plan and our new director of support services comes on board with our clinical team.
So right now, there really wouldn't need to be any discussion of this at the board meeting on the 15th. It's just letting the committee know we'll bring this back next year. Are there any questions or concerns about that approach?
No, I would just say I agree with both of you. It's probably better to table it, especially when you're going to hire somebody new kind of to oversee that position. So I think that's the right decision.
Okay. And you can see in the cross-reference when you look at the notes for that policy, I'll go to the back there. You can see here, it's an optional policy. And so it's really up to a district whether or not they want to adopt, and if so, to what extent. So we'll take a real close look at this next year. And then the last policy in the 100s is comparability of services. And this policy does not apply to our district. And the reason is that we do not have more than one school in the same grade span. And so our federal programs coordinator, who again will be our director of support services coming on board, will learn or reinforce, if they're coming from a place where they currently are in charge of federal programs, that we don't have to do this work. We can't do this work because it's about whether or not you're offering similar services across 2 schools in your community for Title I services at the same grade band. And that's just, it doesn't apply to Springfield. And so this statement here, if the district has more than one building per grade span, we don't. So I would check, if I were checking something, I would check federal programs coordinator. So we can include the policy and check federal programs coordinator, but we want to be clear with the board, this policy does not apply to our district at this time. Down the road, could there be 2 schools with the same grade band? In theory, yes. That would be our primary building if we split K1-2 across 2 schools, as used to be the case. But currently this isn't relevant for us. And so the recommendation we have here is that there's no need to add this policy, as it doesn't apply to us. Are there any questions?
No, I agree. We should just not worry about it.
Okay. All right, so with those recommendations and changes, we will have all but completed the 100s. We'll just be putting a hold on 131 till our next meeting when we look at 220, and we'll put a hold on 146.1 until we get into the next school year. And otherwise, we'll have finished 2 sections, the 0s and the 100s. We're plugging along, okay? And so the next steps are that you can see the 200s are in here. So we will start to work as an administrative team. This section will be the meatiest section of our policy review, because these are all this is everything that has to do with student life and student programs. And so I suspect this will take us a little longer to work our way through, but we will review them carefully, and then wanted to tentatively schedule, and I'll stop share for a minute, wanted to tentatively schedule a next meeting for towards the end of February. We need a little bit more time to review these policies with a broader group, but wanted to see, would you still like a morning meeting? And is 1 hour still comfortable for you, 8 to 9, or would you like us to shift to an afternoon meeting for maybe that last week of February?
I prefer
Yeah.
a morning meeting. I don't know what, Amy, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say 8 o'clock is tough for me. If we wanted to do it in the morning, if we could just push it to 8:30 maybe. Personally, I would like an afternoon meeting, but I know that doesn't work for the majority, so I'm okay if we keep it in the morning. I would just ask if we could push it back to 8:30.
Okay. Others?
8:30 is good for me. I just prefer a morning meeting.
8:30 is fine.
My schedule is so different from day to day. Anything is fine. It's just the advance with which we solidify it, which is important to me.
Okay, so would Wednesday morning, February 23rd, or Thursday morning, February 24th, from 8:30 to 9:30 work better for the committee?
Either date, whatever's good for you.
Okay,
24th works great for me.
okay,
Yeah, either one works, whatever works for the majority is fine.
okay,
If I could, the 24th would be better.
okay. Carla's the 24th, okay with you?
Fine with me.
All right, so we'll say that our next meeting will be Thursday morning, the 24th at 8:30. And we'll get you an agenda in advance. It'll be a portion of the 200s. How many, we'll see as we work through those over the next month. Okay? Our goal is to be finished this policy review by the end of the summer. If we're moving too quickly or we're trying to attack too many at once, you just let us know. All right, but we're trying to get this done in the technically in the school year, but by the end of the summer it'll be okay too. All right.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank
Yeah,
you.
Take care.
thank you. This is really great.
Thank you. Who among you will be the reporter at the February 15th meeting? I'll make sure that if you want to review notes, we have the time to do that. I don't see anybody doing that. Who is the committee chair?
I'll volunteer.
I think it might be you.
Yeah, I think it is.
I think
So,
it-
I'll
All right,
volunteer.
Mike.
I'm gonna.
So if
Follow
you
this
need
committee.
assistance, if the committee if you review, we have plenty of time since we don't have a meeting on February 1st. So if prior to the 15th, you need any assistance with getting those notes together, please let me know.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you all so much. Thanks, Dr. Yannicka.
Thank you. You have a great day.
Right, bye, everybody.
Take
All
care.
right, bye-bye.